Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It started with a laugh, one of those low, warm ones that slips into your ears and stays there. Ben had always been around in the periphery of my life, a quiet neighbor with a tendency to notice things no one else did. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, and he certainly wasn't the kind of man you'd catch a room turning to look at when he walked in. But there was something in his eyes, something that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when you looked. At you, I'd been married to Daniel for almost 9 years. And lately, those 9 years felt like they'd been etched into my bones, weighing me down. Daniel wasn't cruel, far from it. But somewhere between the mortgage payments, his endless work trips, and our mechanical dinner conversations, something had gone flat. It was as if we were both living in the same house, but entirely separate lives. Brushing past each other like strangers in a hallway, Ben lived 2 doors down. Our conversations started with simple neighborly exchanges, a wave over the hedges, a shared complaint about the potholes on our street. Then it became borrowing things, a drill, a bag of sugar. One evening during a summer blackout, he invited me over for a drink on his porch. The air was warm and sticky, and the only light came from the candles scattered on his table. We talked about nothing and everything. I told him how I used to paint before life got busy. He told me about his younger sister who lived overseas, and how he missed her. When I laughed at something he said, his eyes lingered on me just a fraction too long. It was subtle, but I felt a dot after that. I found myself inventing excuses to see him. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing at my kitchen window, watching for signs that he was home. One rainy afternoon, I was walking back from the store when the downpour caught me. I ducked under his porch for shelter, shivering slightly from the sudden chill. "You're soaked," he said, pulling the door open. "Come in before you freeze." I hesitated. I shouldn't, I knew it. But the warm light spilling from his hallway was too inviting. I stepped inside, shaking the rain from my hair. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a towel. As I dried my hair, he stood close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. It wasn't his size that struck me. Ben wasn't tall like Daniel, and he didn't have broad, commanding shoulders. But he had a steadiness, a grounded presence that made me feel seen. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When I spoke, he looked at me like my words mattered. That night, we sat on his couch with mugs of tea, the storm rattling the windows. I don't remember how my hand ended up in his, but I remember the way his thumb brushed over my knuckles like he was memorizing them. I felt something crack open inside me, a tenderness I hadn't realized I was starving for. Over the weeks, our meetings became more frequent. Sometimes they were innocent, coffee in his kitchen, helping him fix a broken lamp. Sometimes there was more, an unspoken tension threading between us, a magnetic pull neither of us dared to name out loud. One evening, I told him, "You're not what I expected." He smiled, a little self-conscious. "Not tall enough? Not enough of a presence?" I shook my head. "It's not about that. You were big, Ben, but you've still taken me apart. Piece by piece, without even trying." His expression softened, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But he didn't. Instead, he placed his hand over mine and held it, as if anchoring me in place. The line between what was wrong and what felt right blurred more with each passing day. And I knew deep down, there was no going back to the way things were before Ben started noticing me. The next few days after the storm felt like a quiet current running underneath my life. Daniel was away on another work trip, sending me short, factual texts, flight updates, a quick "hope you're well," and nothing more. I went about my routine, but my mind kept circling back to Ben. It wasn't just attraction. That would have been easier to dismiss. What was happening between us was slower, more dangerous, an emotional erosion. He'd gotten under my skin. Without a single grand gesture, just by showing up, by listening, by making me feel that my thoughts were worth holding on to. One Saturday morning, I saw him outside, kneeling by the garden bed that bordered his porch. He was wearing a worn gray t-shirt, damp with sweat, soil staining his hands. I told myself I was only going over to say hello. But when he looked up and smiled, my heart caught in my throat. "Morning," he said, sitting back on his heels. "You're up early for a weekend." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. He nodded, like he understood. "Coffee?" Inside his house, the air was warm with the smell of fresh grounds. I sat at the small kitchen table while he poured, and when he placed the mug in front of me, his fingers brushed mine. Barely a touch, but it felt deliberate. We talked about little things until the conversation turned softer. He asked about my marriage gently, like he didn't want to push but couldn't stop himself. I didn't give him the ugly details, just enough for him to know that the space between Daniel and me had grown wide and cold. Ben didn't respond right away. He just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You deserve more." The words hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened and I had to look away. "It's not that simple." "It never is," he said quietly. "But it doesn't make it untrue." From that day, the air between us changed. The next time I saw him was at the grocery store. I was reaching for a jar on the top shelf when his hand appeared beside mine, taking it down with an easy movement. I turned, startled, and there he was, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of soap and cedar on his skin. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. The tension was in the space between us, pulling tighter with every second. That week, another storm rolled in. Rain hammered the streets, the wind howling against the windows. I was in my living room when the power flickered and went out. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and stepped into the rain. My feet carried me 2 doors down. When he opened the door, his hair was mussed, his eyes warm despite the storm raging behind me. "Come in," he said simply. I stepped inside, dripping water onto his floor. He helped me out of my coat, his hands lingering on my shoulders just a fraction longer than necessary. We stood there for a heartbeat too long, and then he stepped back, as if reminding himself of the line we hadn't crossed. We ended up on his couch, talking over the candlelight again. The conversation drifted to what we wanted, in life and love and the quiet moments no one else saw. I told him things I'd never said out loud, things I wasn't sure I should admit even to myself. He listened, his gaze steady on mine, until I felt almost undone by the intensity of it. And then, in the soft hum of the rain outside, I said it. "You weren't big, Ben, but you've taken me apart." His jaw tensed, his breath catching like he was holding something back. "You don't know how much I want to close that distance. Then why don't you?" I asked, my voice quieter than the storm. "Because once I start, I don't think I'll stop." I swallowed hard, my pulse in my ears. "Then let it happen." The moment felt suspended, like the world outside had gone still just for us. He didn't move at first. The storm rattled the windows, and the only light came from the flicker of candles on the coffee table. I could see his chest rise and fall. Deliberate, steady, like he was forcing himself to keep control. I wanted to break that control. The days leading up to this moment had been nothing but a quiet pull, a kind of gravity I didn't know how to fight. After that morning coffee in his kitchen, after the grocery store encounter, after the way his hand brushed mine when he passed me the jar, every interaction had been threaded with an unspoken question neither of us dared answer. Now we were sitting so close that I could feel the heat of him, even without touching. My knee was inches from his. My breath slowed to match his. "You shouldn't say things like that," he murmured, eyes never leaving mine. "Why not?" "Because I'm not sure I could stop." He leaned back, running a hand over his jaw, like he needed to put distance between us before he made a mistake. I almost let him. Almost. But then I remembered how lonely it had been in my marriage. In my own house, in my own skin dots, so I closed. The gap myself it wasn't some reckless dive into him. It was slow. I shifted, turning toward him until our knees brushed. He stilled but didn't move away. "I'm not asking you to stop," I said softly. Something in his expression cracked. the careful restraint slipping. He reached up, his fingers brushing a damp strand of hair from my cheek. It was the gentlest touch, but it carried a weight that nearly undid me. We didn't kiss. Not yet. Instead, we sat there, breathing in each other's air, the silence between. Yes, saying everything words couldn't. The storm outside grew louder. But it was nothing compared to the sound of my own heartbeat. Ben finally stood, breaking the spell for a moment. "You're cold," he said, his voice rough. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a blanket. When he draped it over my shoulders, his hands lingered, warm through the fabric. We talked more about things that had nothing to do with the tension between us, yet everything to do with it. Childhood memories, places we'd never been but wanted to see. Music we played when no one else was listening. At some point, I leaned into him without thinking. It felt natural, like I had always been meant to fit there. His arm slid around me almost reluctantly, like he knew that once he held me, it would be harder to let go. We stayed like that for a long time, watching the candlelight dance across the walls. The air was thick with all the things we hadn't yet done, but wanted to. Then I turned my face toward him, and his eyes met mine, not questioning anymore, not hesitating. "Ben," I whispered. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He already knew, and when his lips finally met mine, it wasn't hurried or desperate. It was deep and certain, like a promise that neither of us had spoken aloud. The world outside could have ended in that moment, and I wouldn't have noticed. The kiss lingered, warm and slow, the kind of kiss that felt like it had been waiting for years to happen. It wasn't rushed. It was careful, almost reverent, as if both of us were afraid of ending it too soon. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel the weight of his breath on my skin. "We shouldn't," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. I smiled faintly. "You've been saying that since the day we met." He chuckled, low and quiet, then shook his head like he was trying to find the right words. "This isn't who I'm supposed to be." "I know," I said, softer than before. "Me neither." For a while we didn't speak. The storm raged against the windows, a steady drumbeat, while the candle flames swayed in the draft. His hand found mine, fingers curling slowly until our palms fit together. That small gesture felt more intimate than anything else we had shared. We kept talking, drifting between confessions and laughter. He told me about his first car, a rusted pickup that broke down every other week, and I told him about the summer. I almost ran away just to see if anyone would notice. It was easy with him, dangerously easy, like every word pulled me further into something I wouldn't be able to walk away from. Hours slipped by, but the storm didn't let up. At some point, Ben got up and stoked the fire in the living room, the glow casting warm light across his face. I watched him from the couch, the blanket still around my shoulders, and felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. When he came back, he didn't sit at the far end of the couch this time. He sat right beside me, his thigh brushing mine, his scent pulling me in. "Tell me something true," he said. I hesitated, the truth too big to hold in my hands, but I gave it to him anyway. "I think about you more than I should." His eyes softened, and for a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, with the smallest shake of his head, he muttered, "You're making this impossible." But he didn't pull away. Instead, his hand cupped my jaw, thumb brushing my cheek, and the second kiss was deeper, hungrier. The world tilted under me, not because of the storm, but because I knew I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. We broke apart only when the fire cracked loudly, showering sparks. My lips felt swollen, my pulse unsteady. "Stay tonight," he murmured. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation, one I knew I should refuse. But my heart answered before my mind could. Okay. The hours after that blurred into a slow unraveling, not of clothing or rules, but of walls. We stayed close, fingers intertwined, shoulders touching, words spilling like they had been locked up for too long. Every now and then, his hand would brush against mine, And I'd feel that spark again. The one that had been there since the beginning. It was well past midnight when the storm finally began to fade. But by then, I knew the real storm wasn't outside. It was here between us, and I didn't want it to end. Ben's arm slipped around me, tentative at first, then firmer, as if he was finally allowing himself to hold me the way he'd wanted to for weeks. The weight of it was grounding, yet my pulse kept racing. I could feel the heat radiating from him, his breath brushing my temple, and every inch of me wanted to lean in closer. We sat in the soft crackle of the fire, neither of us speaking both, knowing the words we weren't saying were louder than any conversation we could have. His hand began to trace small, absent circles over my shoulder through the blanket, and the touch sent a shiver through me. When I tilted my head to look at him, his gaze locked on mine. There was no hesitation now, no space for doubt. He leaned in again, but this time the kiss was deeper, more urgent. His fingers slid into my hair, and I felt myself melting against him, surrendering to the way he held me like I was something precious and breakable. I don't know how long we kissed, but each one seemed to pull us further into something neither of us could stop. The world outside had gone quiet, the rain softened to a whisper, the thunder gone, but inside my heartbeat was loud, echoing in my ears. We shifted on the couch, my knees brushing his. I could feel the strength in him, the way his chest rose and fell faster now. His thumb stroked along my jaw as he pulled back just enough to look at me. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he murmured. "I think I do." I breathed, my voice barely more than a whisper. The tension between us was a living thing now, wrapping around us and tightening until it felt impossible to breathe without touching him again. His forehead rested against mine, our lips brushing and teasing, fleeting passes that made me ache for more. Somewhere in the middle of it, my hand slid over his chest, feeling the steady pound of his heart beneath my palm. He caught my wrist gently, pressing a kiss to my fingers before letting them go, an unspoken permission to keep touching, keep exploring the space we'd been afraid to cross. We talked in between the kisses, in that breathless, quiet way people do when they don't want the night to end. He told me he'd thought about this since the first week he met me, and I admitted I had too, even when I told myself I hadn't. We laughed softly at the futility of pretending otherwise. Eventually, we sank deeper into the couch, tangled together under the blanket. His warmth wrapped around me as his fingers traced slow patterns down my arm, and I knew this wasn't just about desire. It was about connection, about two people who had been starving for something they couldn't name until they found it. In each other, the firelight danced across his face as he looked down at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just want, but a kind of quiet awe. I don't know who moved first, but we were kissing again, and this time the kiss was unhurried yet intense, like we were memorizing each other. Every brush of his lips felt like a promise I wasn't sure we could keep, but in that moment I didn't care. The night stretched on like that, not a rush to get somewhere, but a slow unfolding. Every laugh, every stolen glance, every kiss drew us closer until it felt like we had known each other for years, not months. And when I finally fell asleep against him, it was with the warmth of his arms around me and the faintest smile on my lips, knowing something between us had shifted forever. When I woke, the rain had stopped. The first light of morning spilled, and through the window, pale and soft, catching the edges of Ben's hair where it fell over his forehead. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling the warmth of him against my back. At some point during the night, his arm had wrapped fully around me, his hand resting at my waist as though it belonged there. It should have felt wrong. It should have made me pull away. But instead, it felt like the most natural thing in my world. I turned in his arms, and his eyes opened instantly, as if he'd been awake, waiting. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. His thumb brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, and I could see the question in his gaze, not whether I wanted this, but whether I was ready to face what came after. I didn't answer with words. I kissed him. It was different in the daylight. There was no storm to hide us, no shadows to blur the lines. The kiss was deep and certain, a declaration more than an exploration. His hand slid into my hair, holding me there as if he didn't want to let go. We sat up, still tangled together, the blanket falling around our shoulders. His touch was slower now, deliberate, like he wanted to memorize me one last time before. The day intruded. My fingertips traced over his jaw, down the line of his throat, committing him to memory in the same way. "I don't want this to end," he said quietly. "Then maybe it doesn't have to," I replied, though I wasn't sure either of us believed it. He smiled then, not the polite smile I'd seen so many times before, but something softer, almost vulnerable. His lips found mine again, and this time the kiss deepened until the rest of the world ceased to exist. The warmth of his body, the sound of his breath, the faint creak of the couch beneath us, it all fused into one long, unbroken moment. When his hands slid down my back, pulling me closer, there was no hesitation left in me. I let myself melt into him completely, every barrier I built crumbling in the light of his touch. Our kisses grew slower, but more intense, every movement charged with the knowledge that we were stepping over a line we couldn't uncross. The sun had risen fully by the time we finally pulled apart. Breathless, I rested my forehead against his, my fingers still curled into the fabric of his shirt. "I don't know what happens next," I whispered. He kissed my cheek, lingering there for a heartbeat. "Neither do I, but I know I don't regret this." And as I left later that morning, my hair still smelling faintly of his cologne, I realized I didn't either. The storm had passed, but something in me had shifted, something that wouldn't be put back in place. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd been taken apart, piece by piece, by a man who hadn't just touched my body, but reached somewhere far deeper.